Today, I'm bringing you a video that I wanted to have out in late April, early May. Obviously, that didn't happen. Sorry. Despite that, it's here now, and wow, what an interesting anime this turned out to be. Before I get too far into that, if you're new around here, under normal conditions, I usually upload once a week, but with longer videos comes longer script writing, recording, and editing. But I try to put a lot more work into these every other week or every 2-week videos. If you like what's going on, maybe consider hitting that red subscribe button or share this with someone you know does like this kind of content. And as always, check community posts for the latest and greatest. With that out of the way, I'm going to start by giving my general thoughts and impressions on the anime Shinsekai Yori, or From the New World. This was my first actual rewatch of the anime, as I'd initially completed it sometime back around 2018, and I'm not gonna lie, this anime got confusing at times. It's a very complex story with a lot of fascinating themes and character dynamics, but there are two things that stood out to me the most. One, this isn't presented as a romance anime, but there's no denying that many of the decisions and actions that are taken by the main characters throughout this anime are based off of emotions and feelings they have for each other. What's even more fascinating is that these relationships are homosexual, same-sex, and it creates a marvelous twist-filled early part of the anime. The most prominent of these relationships is Saki and Maria, but despite the featured same-sex interest, there was little physical interaction between them. The same can be said about Mamoru and Satoru, but there's a reason for this. In episode 4, when the group encounters the false Minishiro, it's explained that the human civilization, on the brink of collapse, must be reformed into one of love, and that humans tend to relieve stress through sexual activities. The same-sex relationships can be explained to the bonobos, who are bisexual by nature. It's assumed that this genomic trait is already present in humans, if not a little stronger than in the ape population. Saki and Maria already have a close bond. The stressful nature of Kamisu 66 and a frightening world of unknowns enhance this relationship while they're still children, cementing it into their identities as they grow into teenagers and eventually adults, though Maria and Mamoru likely don't make it long after they flee the town. The same explanation can be given for Satoru and Mamoru early on as well, but this relationship doesn't have nearly the same mental and emotional toll as we see with Saki and Maria, even long after Maria is gone. The chemical reaction in Saki's brain created by the release of serotonin, cortisol, and even dopamine have apparent outcomes on the actions she decides to take, and even her own reflections on her past. Briefly, cortisol is the stress hormone and can lead to decreased levels of serotonin and other neurotransmitters in the brain, such as dopamine. This decrease is linked to an increase in cortisol, which induces stress, creating high-strung moments and a failure to properly analyze certain situations. Saki is the proponent of an over-induced level of cortisol, but at the same time, she's the textbook example of the effect serotonin has on the brain as well. Dopamine is an addictive chemical and helps explain why, even after decades, Saki never stopped searching for her friends or loving Maria. She was happy with them, but arguably even happier with Maria, and this is the main relationship the anime focuses on. That and the continuous search for Shun, who left Kamisu 66 long before Maria and Mamoru. Satoru and Mamoru form the same kind of close bond, just between two males instead of two females. Shinsekai Yori does an excellent job at explaining this if one watches closely enough. 2. The secrecy. The town of Kamisu 66 was eerily void of explanation, and it wasn't until Saki met with the chairwoman of the ethics committee that we really began to see what was being kept from sight. Not only was Saki accused of aiding Maria and Mamoru after they fled the town, she would have been punished for something she had nothing to do with. The committee was expecting Saki and Satoru to act out like it was some kind of expected behavior, which leads to some rather interesting but startling questions. If there was an expected behavior, does the expression of such entail implication? We know they were innocent and only harbored good intentions. But if there's a silencing of voices that try to speak the truth, this creates a problem and makes the viewer wonder who the mastermind behind all of this is. The next question this brings up pertains to something that is frequently said multiple times, that being, why is Saki apparently so different? She didn't act out at the committee hearing as expected, but that doesn't make the town of Kamisu 66 free from implication. In fact, it's almost a nonchalant admittance that only those who comply and follow the general order are allowed freedom. The town has a generally hushed atmosphere to it, like certain things aren't supposed to be discussed, but there's also the mystery of the barrier around the town. Who's not allowed out and what's not allowed in? Why? There's not much of a definitive explanation to this, but it seems like it was meant as a means of control. The children grow up and live their lives knowing that, for some reason, they aren't allowed outside the barrier. The most compelling theory I have for that pertains to the monster rat colonies, and ultimately, how the anime concluded. More on that later too. There's something the children aren't supposed to know, and that gate gets blown wide open in episode 4 when Saki and friends come into contact with the false Minoshiro. While it doesn't directly address the secrecy of Kamisu 66, it does however make sense to think that the troves of information the false Minoshiro store could be used for serious harm and to the detriment of many. Is this the primary reason for the barrier? It's doubtful, but certainly a factor. With that finally out of the way, let's get into the body of this thing. Shinsekai Yori is so unorthodox. Not only does this anime incorporate styles of older Japanese society and culture, it mixes it in with a futuristic setting that meshes old and new. Shinsekai Yori mixes that traditional Japanese culture with something inherently different and new. The development and use of PK powers led to an uncertain future for Japan, as all it took for everything to come crashing down was one person. If we look at episodes 1 through 4, we have the introduction of PK powers, the monster rats, and the false Minoshiro, all highly important plot pieces that would define the latter part of the story. This society was built on fear and meant to be controlled so things wouldn't get out of hand. Of course, those with PK powers feared those with, and when you have power, you have control. This led to an eventual war between the PK users and led to a massive population decline in humanity. Remember, this is all explained in only the first 4 episodes. Episodes 5 and 6 delve a little more into the monster rat colonies and Squealer from the robber fly colony. These monster rats refer to the humans as gods due to their PK powers, but it's not discovered until the very tail end of the anime that the concerns Saki and Satoru had early on were very much real. The children are captured by the monster rats but are freed by Squealer, who is later repaid for his generosity by the use of PK powers by Saki and Satoru. They're beholden to Squealer from the very start, and the realization of this doesn't hit until later on. We're then introduced to Kiromaru, who the children believe is their enemy according to Squealer, and is out to kill them when in all reality, he helps them cross the water, allowing for a speedy return home. So why would Squealer implant such an idea that Kiromaru was their enemy? This is an interesting conflict, the nature of which isn't revealed until the final 3 episodes of the anime or so, and why it exists. We see these 2 leaders of the giant hornet and robber fly colonies butt heads later on in the anime, a little more than halfway through, which sets the climax into motion and the likely reasoning behind everything. Things get even more interesting in episode 8 when the first of several time skips occur. Group 1, Saki, Satoru, Mamoru, Shun, and Maria are still together, and in the 2 years the time skip covered, it's already more than apparent that the attitudes and personalities of the children have changed. They've grown into themselves, and their identities are already nearly secured. It can be inferred, however, that the stress and trauma from the hike in the forest that led to the false Minoshiro and then the monk's death of shame after reprimanding Group 1 left a lingering impact. Public display of affection between Satoru and Mamoru and even Saki and Maria doesn't necessarily mean it's because of an increase of cortisol in the brain from the event, but it does foreshadow the coming increased tensions that will plague the final members of Group 1 through the rest of the anime. While the anime starts with a dystopic and troubled atmosphere, it isn't until episode 9 and the culmination of the first part of the anime at the end that what seemed like an already dark anime actually begins to darken substantially. Shun's disappearance is only the beginning of a series of events that sends Shinsekai Yori into a mind-bending tailspin. Recall that the anime mentions the existence of impure cats, but to the average viewer, these sound like mere fantasies made up by children. The irony is that the impure cats are real, and the initial targeting of Shun makes it clear that the town of Kamisu 66 harbors a dark past, especially when Saki begins to ask questions about what happened to Shun. Similarly, it can be inferred that Saki's nosy nature could land her in more trouble than what it's worth. The end of episode 9 is the last time Shun is actually seen and not a figment of imagination. This is likely where he meets an unfortunate end, but his character doesn't get written out like most character deaths in anime, which presents an interesting nod towards the impact of mental fortitude. Think about the aforementioned chemicals in the brain, and how they all play a central role in regulating the emotions and tensions throughout Group 1. The impact of a high-stress environment and an emotional detachment from Shun, a childhood friend, has clear effects on most notably Saki. It's never explained that when she actually sees Shun again at multiple times decades later, if it's just a stress-induced desire to see him again or if she's actually seeing him. This is a direct tie into the final two-thirds of the anime as it delves deeper into the mystery of the ogres, karmic demons, monster rats, and what the reality of the world really is. We go from a group of 5 friends to 4, which then brings into question who Rio is in episode 11, the supposed replacement for group 1. This is important because each group has 5 members, so why would group 1 all of a sudden have 4 members? It's equally as important to note that they can't remember who Shun is and why there's a friend they can't remember. Explanation of this falls short considering the education committee tried to replace Shun with Rio, who doesn't even get much screen time, nor does he become real embedded in group 1, so why include him? Since this is a 25 episode anime, episode 12 or 13 would be a good place to begin the second part, and episode 11 is as good a place as any to demarcate the 2 very different parts to this anime. As episode 12 gets going, we're introduced to the chairwoman of the ethics committee who wants Saki to take over as the next head. But that's not what's odd about this. The fact that she's lived for over 100+ years and is now suddenly entrusting the future of Kamisu 66 to Saki is the kicker here. We're told Saki is different, but we don't know what makes her different, and this only seems to exacerbate the mystery. She's told she would regain access to her memories again if she accepted the position. That's a pretty big carrot to dangle in front of her. As much of a mystery as all of this is, the final episode actually tries to explain it, and we'll get there. Episodes 13 and 14 I've already discussed to a certain degree, and many of the same questions persist, but the targeting of Mamoru specifically is one that never gets explained, except for when Saki is told the group is only as strong as their weakest link. What does this mean? And even if Mamoru were the weakest link, what would he be holding the remaining 3 members of Group 1 back from? Similarly, Maria's unwavering support of Mamoru, her decision to remain behind, beyond the spiritual barrier with him, can also be brought into question. If she were as devoted to Saki as she shows she is, why not come back to Kamisu 66 with Mamoru? Well, it's likely she would have been punished and tried before the education committee for aiding Mamoru and helping him to flee, kind of like the accusations thrown at Saki. This throws a wrench in the romantic side of the story and plunges the anime into the icy cold waters of shock and realization. Mamoru claimed he was being hunted by trickster cats, and Saki drops the assumption that Mamoru was being targeted before the very same committee. And the irony is, the very same committee shot her down only for her to see the trickster cats with her own eyes. Not only is information being withheld here, it's being actively covered up for the sake of what? A better future? The same future that the false Minoshiro said would cease to exist if humanity failed to change its ways? There's clear information being kept from people, and one theory that could attempt to explain this is in the monster rats, so let's move on and get into that a little more. Episode 17 becomes the next time skip of the anime, and this one is rather substantial. Saki and Satoru are now in their mid-20s. Maria and Mamoru fled Kamisu 66 over a decade ago, but where things take a somewhat unexpected turn is when Saki explains that she now oversees mutant research at Thatchering Village. Why is this important? This is important because Saki has always had a strong relationship with the monster rat colonies and monster rats themselves. The role not only seems fitting, it's a role with a lot of high stakes attached. If 2 colonies came to a disagreement or want to wage war against each other, the measure has to be approved by her department, and this is perhaps the most telling part of the whole anime. The monster rats have become so technologically advanced and adept that they're now an actual potential threat to humans. If you keep anything locked up or restrict its ability to exercise free will, there will come a day when it has enough and lashes out. And this is precisely what happens. Saki is on the front lines of, quote, horrible events. Foreshadowing. This is where Kiramaru and Squealer re-enter the picture as the leaders of 2 renowned monster rat colonies, and they are not happy with each other, accusing the other of conflict. If we look back on episode 4 in the False Minoshiro, remember how it was just wandering around in the forest, totally unguarded? Does it not stand to reason that the monster rats could have come across one of these and obtained the countless troves of knowledge contained within the walking library? It certainly explains the battle strategies, armor, and weapons deployed by the monster rats, yet it's never fully explained, leaving the viewer to wonder if it was just a matter of accidental influence or purposeful sabotage. A coup d'etat against humanity itself. However it happened remains mostly irrelevant after episodes 17 and 18, but it does open the door to questions on how this level of knowledge was obtained so quickly. Episode 14 compared ogres to that of nuclear weapons, more foreshadowing. All that we're told is that ogres are dangerous, they've lost control of their PK powers, they're impossible to stop. This is almost too ironic because an ogre does get introduced in episode 19 as part of the monster rat attack on the villages. This whole time we're left to wonder the validity of the claims and stories made and told by elders and committee members alike. Everyone had grown so used to normalcy, complacency, that there couldn't possibly be an ogre. Not after making sure to clean house, per se, by eliminating children who were the weakest link or showed too much promise. Shun, Maria, and Mamoru. Okay, but why wasn't Saki targeted? She was, but in a different way. Had the ethics committee chairwoman not stepped in to interrupt Saki's hearing before the education committee, she would have been tried for aiding the escape of Maria and Mamoru. Her level of knowledge and awareness remained threats to the stability of Japan. Her role in mutant research was far too valuable, and her connection with Squealer proved invaluable despite the losses humanity would face from the monster rat assault, and subsequent grooming of ogre children that only come to light in the final episode. The big bombshell here that ties everything together is the literal genome of the monster rats, though. Genetically modified creatures based off of humans but with the phenotype of a naked mole rat due to the interbreeding. What became a problem for some became a problem for all, as the rampage of the ogre was merely a trial run. Yes, you heard that right. Squealer, who eventually ascended to the name Yakumaru, likely a social elevation having a human name, was breeding child ogres as a means to take over humanity and enact revenge for the ways they treated the monster rats. But here's where another wrench gets thrown into the mix. Saki still sees and hears Shun, decades after their final encounter at the cabin in the woods, beyond the spiritual barrier. He tells her the child is not an ogre, but if the child isn't an ogre, what is it? Well, the only real theory that fits is the child just didn't have control of their PK powers yet, and being raised in a monster rat setting likely instilled a lot of animalistic instincts in the child, hence the rampage into the villages. She simply didn't know better, was fed just as much counter-information as the committees fed the people of Japan and Kamizu 66, all to fit a specific worldview or narrative. In this instance, both sides are equally to blame in their handling of the situation, but would humanity have learned its lesson otherwise? The final recurring theme throughout much of Shinsekai Yori is self-sacrifice. Shun flees Kamizu 66 to protect Saki and the villagers, Maria flees with Mamoru, upending her life entirely to be with him so he wasn't alone, and Kiromaru's willingness to sacrifice himself to end the conflict. In some ways, you could see Saki's lifelong devotion to the monster rats and trying to better understand them as a self-sacrifice, but I'll leave that up to you guys. The sheer advancement of the robber fly colony alone was startling for a number of reasons, but the most prominent is the time it took for them to develop a society that began to mimic that of life before the war that almost wiped humanity out. It just proves that these monster rats were not dumbed-down versions of naked mole rats or a failed genetic hybrid of human and monster rat. They were legitimate members of society. If you poke the bear enough times, it will attack, and that's exactly what happened. It's like the saying, those who fail to learn history are doomed to repeat it, and judging by the monster rat assault on the villages and the subsequent introduction of the quote-unquote ogre, it's a safe bet to assume humanity needed a wake-up call. The hoarding of information, elimination of those either too unique and talented, and those who made up the weakest link were the catalyst to humanity finding itself up a creek without a paddle once more. Shinsekai Yori takes so many left turns just to slam on the brakes and go 90 miles an hour reverse, that it takes careful time and attention to fully understand what's happening. Every character interaction is formulated in a way that you have to go back and reference it again. For instance, when Saki and Satoru laid under the stars in the boat on the canal that one night. This is a memory that's used to test whether Ryo Inaba is the forgotten friend, Shun, they've been trying to remember. Almost every minute of this anime holds some sort of significance, and it's incredibly easy to get lost or bored during the slower parts, but everything has a purpose, and the story wouldn't be as strong without them. When you consider the Psycho Buster and the weighted importance it had on the story for only about 2 or 3 episodes, it's easy to think that it's something meaningless and can be brushed off, and to a degree, that's reasonable. Had the Psycho Buster failed to do its job, this anime would have had a much more gruesome end. Similarly, we never would have received Yakumaru, Squealer, and Kiromaru's confessions on humanity, leaving the ending one massive question mark. Both surprisingly and unsurprisingly, however, Saki revotes the status she had given to the monster rats. She no longer sees them as human after the attempted coup on humanity. This is fascinating because it means Saki has finally found her truth, not something someone told her when she was 10, to keep her and Group 1 complacent and abiding. This revocation of the monster rat's humanity strikes a startling tone in an already startling anime. Expect consequences for your actions. Sadly, we never see the education or ethics committees own up to their misdoings, which creates a small plot hole, especially since the end of episode 25 begins another, albeit brief, time skip. Saki becoming the chairwoman of the ethics committee in the end and giving Squealer the relief of death after decades of the infinite hell. The maximum amount of pain tolerable would be inflicted upon the brain and then immediately healed just to repeat this endless cycle. Hints that Saki, despite everything that had happened, never lost her humanity. Even though she knew her fellow committee members would have had their reservations about finally releasing him, she chose to finally end the suffering, both hers and Squealer's. The opening first half of the anime and its portrayal of same-sex relationships isn't lost, but Shinsekai Yori's focus wasn't on the non-traditional. Instead, it dove into the human psyche and pulled out innate desires and primal feelings that were exacerbated by moments of heightened stress and lowered during releases of serotonin. Saki and Satoru had no one left to turn to besides each other if they truly wanted a lifelong partner. Anyone or anything else would have seen Forrester lacking that spark had they tried to incorporate new characters midway through. Saki never lost her love and devotion for Maria and Satoru his for Mamoru, but the reality of the situation was, someone had to start over and put humanity back on the right path. Saki and Satoru were the only ones who could do that. Shun, Maria, and Mamoru were never fully written out of the story, but I do wish they'd had a bigger impact in the second half of the anime. This script is literally 15 pages long, and I truthfully don't know how I'm ever going to edit this video, so I'll leave you with this. The wall scroll at the very end of the anime says this: Subete o kairu sozo kako soga. It is the imagination that changes everything. Next video is going to be fun and a very interesting and much shorter video, and dive into the human psyche and its psychology. God knows I need a break after this one. Until next time. What was this encounter really about, and why was it Zorome that the story chose to leave behind? The idea of friendship is peculiar, as he even mentions the fights he has with Miku, hence why she continues to chase after Mei time and time again. While this creates a sense of importance within the anime and Yuzu's own endeavors, her purpose, it's important to note that this